She was wrongly fined by Amy Coney Barrett. Instead of lashing out, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett gave the most poised response Washington has seen in years. And it changed everything. There were too many files on the desk. That much was clear. Judge Amy Coney Barrett had just wrapped up a long morning in the West Conference Room of the Supreme Court building. The session wasn't high stakes, just a closed-door administrative review on procedural filings for pending committee recommendations. Hello friends, if you're new here then don't forget to hit subscribe button, and if you like then hit the like button also, and don't forget to tell me in the comments where you from watching this video. These weren't the kinds of hearings that made the news. In fact, most of them didn't even make internal newsletters. They were supposed to be clean, methodical, dry. That's why no one noticed when something slipped. A junior clerk, recently reassigned from a Treasury rotation, had accidentally attached an enforcement code to the wrong hearing file. It was a common enough mix-up, one that usually got caught in the triple review process. But that day, 2 senior staffers were out sick. The third was covering 2 floors of filings. When Barrett skimmed through the docket during lunch, she didn't blink. She signed off. Her initials went through, and just like that, the fine went out. It was a 5-figure civil penalty, citing misconduct under Section March 6, 12. Normally used for contempt during sworn testimony. It was serious, especially since no such misconduct had taken place. The person it was issued to, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. At that exact moment, Crockett was halfway through a tense Energy Committee hearing inside the Rayburn House office building. She was mid-sentence, responding to a jab from a colleague about climate subsidies when her aide Janine leaned in and whispered into her ear. "You're going to want to see this." The printout had no cover letter. Just a formal PDF attachment, stamped with the seal of the Supreme Court. The charge made no sense. Jasmine flipped the paper over, thinking there had to be more. There wasn't. Just a file number, a statute code, and a digital signature from Amy Coney Barrett herself. "Is this some kind of joke?" she muttered. "Nope," Janine replied. "It went out to media outlets too. We just got a ping from the Hill." Jasmine sat back in her chair. For a split second, her face went blank, caught between confusion and disbelief. Then her eyes narrowed. She finished her comments without breaking stride. Her voice, smooth, calm, maybe even cooler than usual. No one else in the room had any idea what just landed in her lap. Back in her office, the team was already spiraling. "How is this even possible?" her communications director asked, pacing. "This is the Supreme Court. They don't just fine sitting members of Congress. Unless someone's trying to send a message," her legal aide added. But Jasmine didn't respond. She was staring at the document, her hands resting on the armrest of the chair, unmoving. Her lips were pressed into a thin, unreadable line. She didn't yell. She didn't throw anything. She just sat there, blinking less than usual. The room waited. Then she spoke. "It's not a message," she said. "It's a mistake. But the kind of mistake people like me don't get to walk away from." Quietly, the energy in the room shifted. Her staff began looking at one another, some curious, some concerned. Jasmine leaned forward and placed the printout face down on the table. "They expect me to scream," she said. "To call someone out. To post a thread. I'm not giving them that. Not yet." "Then what?" her chief of staff asked. "We hold," she replied. "Just for a second. We watch who scrambles. We watch who stays silent. Then we decide what this is really about." But across the city, in a quiet office on 1st Street Northeast, no one yet realized that a misfiled code on an overworked Thursday afternoon had just lit a match. And the flame was already moving. Jasmine didn't go home that night. Her office stayed lit well past midnight. Staff shuffled in and out, coffee mugs refilled without asking. Doors half closed but never quite shut. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. But the fear in the room wasn't just about the fine. It was about what could come next. Why would a Supreme Court justice sign off on this? Her policy advisor muttered, scrolling through scanned court dockets. "Even if it was a mistake, this isn't some parking ticket. This is weapon-grade paper. Jasmine stood near the window. Not looking out, just listening. Her earrings were off. Hair pinned back. Sleeves rolled up. She wasn't performing. She was processing. It's protocol, said her legal aide, Mason. There's a digital review system. The code must have been auto-filled. And the assistant judge signed without seeing the attachment. That happens more than you think, right? But it doesn't usually land on us, said Janine. Still cross-checking files with one hand, typing with the other. Jasmine turned, finally speaking. Who else has this gone to before? Silence. Mason exhaled through his nose. Nobody we've found yet. The code used was meant for courtroom disruptions. Not hearings, and never congressional hearings. So I'm the test case, she said calmly. He looked up. You think it's intentional? I think someone's going to call it a glitch. I also think if my name wasn't Jasmine Crockett, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. That landed heavy. Nobody challenged her. Outside the building, news vans had already started lining the street. The press hadn't gone full fever pitch. But they knew something strange had happened. A fine from a sitting Supreme Court justice. Aimed at an elected representative. That wasn't a headline you could ignore. It was already trending on political Twitter. The blogs would be next. By 2 a.m., her team had pieced together a plausible theory. A junior clerk likely attached the wrong violation code to a docket involving congressional compliance reports. The system's error check hadn't flagged it. Because technically the statute still fell under federal civil penalties. All it took was a single unchecked box. But that didn't explain why it got signed. Jasmine leaned on the table, tracing her fingers along the edges of the document. One more time, do you want to make a statement? Janine asked. No, she said. Not yet. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring. Then again. This time, a text. Congresswoman Crockett. I believe you've been caught in a procedural error. We're looking into it. Please hold off on public statements. Judicial Admin Office. She read it out loud. Mason scoffed. Please hold off. So they get to screw up. And we're supposed to sit tight while they sweep it under a rug? Jasmine didn't respond right away. Then she said quietly. I'm not going to war over a typo. But I'm not about to be the footnote in someone else's cleanup either. A long pause. Then she stood up. Pulled her jacket from the chair. Let's prep something for press. No, for the public. Something that speaks to people who've been told to sit tight one too many times. I'll say it simple. I'll say it clear. And they'll have to answer. After that, Janine looked uncertain. You want to go public before they fix it? I'm not naming names. Not yet. But I'm not staying quiet just because they're nervous. Mason rubbed his temple. We'll need to be surgical. The wrong tone and it'll look like you're grandstanding. She turned to him, softly. I don't need to yell. The story speaks for itself. By 3 a.m. they had drafted 3 versions of her statement. One was formal. One emotional. The third, just 5 sentences long, was the one she chose. It didn't name Barrett. Didn't accuse. It asked a question. If the highest court in the land can fine a sitting member of Congress by mistake, what happens when nobody notices? She paused before pressing send. This isn't about revenge, she said. This is about what silence costs. But while her team sharpened the edges of that question, Justice Barrett still had no idea what had just landed in her inbox. And by morning, the quiet would be gone. At 7:42 a.m. Eastern Time, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett hit post. The message went live on her official channels, Twitter, Instagram, her House.gov press page. There were no graphics. No capital letters. Just a white background and black text. Like a legal memo that didn't need decoration. If the highest court in the land can fine a sitting member of Congress by mistake, what happens when nobody notices? 10 minutes later, Politico retweeted it with a siren emoji. MSNBC's morning segment rolled in Jasmine's name before their second cup of coffee. Within the hour, journalists were chasing confirmation. Was this real? Was it political theater? But the silence from the court said enough. Justice Amy Coney Barrett was still unaware. She had no social media. Didn't check the headlines before court briefings. She was prepping for a procedural review session. That had nothing to do with Crockett. Until her chief clerk knocked. "We need to talk," he said. She glanced up, then noticed the folder in his hand. "Is this about the docket 7-7-5-2 file?" He nodded. "There's a problem." Amy took the folder. Inside was the enforcement notice she'd initialed. Now surrounded by frantic annotations and 2 highlighted sections. The recipient, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Her breath caught. Did we? "We did," he confirmed. Wrong code slipped through 2 filters. It shouldn't have gone to her at all. Amy stared at the page. A moment too long. Then. "How bad is the coverage?" "Exploding. The Congresswoman issued a public statement this morning. Carefully worded. No blame. But it's already turning political." Amy closed the file. Jaw tight. "I want a full chain review. Who filed what, when, and how it was missed." "Yes, Justice." "And send a personal note. Not a formal apology, handwritten." "I'll dictate it." As the clerk rushed out, Amy sat back, eyes still on the folder. The mistake wasn't malicious. But it was public. And worse, avoidable. For someone who had built her career on precision. It felt like a punch to the ribs. Meanwhile, in Washington's buzzing political circuit, Jasmine's phone didn't stop buzzing. Don Lemon quoted her on air. Trevor Noah used her post to open his monologue. "You gotta ask yourself," he said to his audience. "If Jasmine Crockett didn't speak up, would anyone even admit this happened?" On the steps of the Capitol, reporters swarmed like they hadn't in months. Cameras focused on the tall woman in a navy blue suit, walking toward the rotunda. Heels steady. Expression unreadable. "Congresswoman Crockett, have you heard directly from Justice Barrett?" "No." "Do you believe this was politically motivated?" "I believe people need systems that don't crumble because of a misclick." "What do you want from the court?" "I want the same thing you want. When someone makes a mistake that could ruin your name, accountability." Her tone wasn't angry. It was even. Too even. And that's what made people listen. By noon, news outlets were pulling old clips of Jasmine in committee debates, painting a picture of a sharp, no-nonsense politician who never grandstand. That added weight to her words. She didn't have a reputation for drama. And that made this feel more serious. The White House press secretary was asked about it in the daily briefing. She gave a carefully hedged answer. Something about respecting judicial processes. Reviewing the facts. But the public wasn't hedging. Talk radio blew up. Hashtag started trending. Hashtag HighJusticeCheck. Hashtag Jasmine Crockett speaks. A retired federal judge called into NPR and admitted. This sort of error, while rare, should terrify every American. If it can happen to a congresswoman, it can happen to you. Back inside Jasmine's office, her team stood watching the reaction. Like it was a slow-building wave. She was quiet. Watching. Not celebrating. "Are you going to push it?" Mason asked. "Call out Barrett by name?" She shook her head. "I don't need to." Janine added, "But the country already knows it was her signature." "Exactly," Jasmine said. "Let them connect the dots. When people find truth for themselves, it sticks deeper." But while Jasmine leaned on strategy and poise, across the street, the woman who signed that paper was preparing for a reckoning of her own. And this time, the silence would be hers to break. Amy Coney Barrett sat at the long oak table in her private chambers. The kind of space that rarely echoed. But this morning, even the silence had weight. Across from her, Michael Renor, her longtime advisor, placed a thick printout of headlines onto the table without a word. The top one read, "Crockett's calm roar, a fine, a question, and a country paying attention." Amy didn't touch it. She'd already seen enough. This wasn't just a typo, she said finally. It was a door left wide open. Michael leaned back. It was a system error. The clerk flagged the wrong code. You reviewed 27 documents that day. It slipped through. I'm not interested in excuses, she replied, steady. I put my signature on that paper, whether I read every comma or not, I own it. Michael hesitated, then said, "There's no precedent for a Supreme Court justice issuing a public apology to a sitting member of Congress." She looked at him. There was no precedent for finding one either. He nodded. "Do you want to release a statement?" "No. I want to speak to her directly." Michael's eyebrows lifted. "That might open you up to even more scrutiny." "Then let them scrutinize me." Amy stood and walked toward the tall window overlooking First Street NE. Outside, clusters of reporters had begun gathering. A couple held up signs. One read, "Accountability doesn't wear robes." "I've sat in too many rooms where people whispered, waited, or hid behind their position," she said. "If we believe in the law, we have to believe in its correction too." She paused. "I'm writing her. You want to deliver it through official channels?" She shook her head. "I'll hand it to her myself." Later that afternoon, a sharply dressed courier arrived at the Rayburn building with a sealed envelope addressed by hand. The front desk staff recognized the name and didn't dare open it. Janine walked it up to Jasmine's office. "You're going to want to see this," she said, echoing her words from 2 days earlier. Jasmine turned the envelope over in her hands slowly. She knew the handwriting instantly, simple, slanted, unadorned. The kind of signature that didn't need flash to carry weight. Inside was a single sheet of ivory paper. Congresswoman Crockett. I take full responsibility for the administrative error that led to the fine issued under my review. It should not have happened, and I regret that it did. You deserve better. I am requesting a full procedural audit and will support any measures necessary to ensure no public servant, or private citizen, is ever subject to such a mistake again. You have my respect and my apology. Amy Coney Barrett. Jasmine read it twice. Then she folded it back up, placed it neatly on her desk, and sat in silence. Her team waited for a reaction, but there was none, not for a long time. She didn't have to write that, Janine finally said. She did, Jasmine answered. And she knew it. That night, neither woman spoke to the press. But in the hours that followed, something changed, in the tone of the national conversation. The debate stopped being about error and started being about responsibility. Fox News ran a segment asking why the media hadn't applauded Barrett's honesty. CNN praised the rare civility between two powerful women on opposite sides of government. TikTok lit up with side-by-side edits of Jasmine's press statement and Barrett's note. In the halls of power, two women who'd never met, never shared a word before this week, had somehow pulled the attention of an entire country toward a single truth. Real leadership isn't about being right. It's about owning it when you're wrong. But while respect began to bloom in the public eye, behind closed doors pressure from both sides started to build. Because not everyone liked what that note had started. The letter hit like a slow wave, gentle at first, then undeniable. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Not because Amy Coney Barrett released it publicly, she hadn't. But because someone inside Jasmine's office had leaked a photo. It wasn't a political stunt. In fact, the photo was blurry, angled from behind Jasmine's desk, probably taken quickly and without her knowing. But it showed her sitting still, looking down at the letter, her face unreadable. And that image spoke louder than words. The headlines followed. Justice writes, Crockett reflects. Two powerhouses. One moment. Can accountability still exist in Washington? A mistake. An apology. A national conversation. Talk radio took the baton from the news cycle. Some hosts praised the whole interaction, calling it a rare show of integrity. Others called it performative, questioning if a private apology should matter more than public consequences. On one right-leaning podcast, a former appellate judge said, "You know what's really shocking? That we're even surprised by a handwritten apology. That tells you how far off track we are." Protests started forming, small at first, then growing outside the Supreme Court steps. Signs called for process reform. One read, "Fix the system before it finds us too." Outside Crockett's Dallas district office, a group held up posters reading, "If Jasmine stayed quiet, we'd never know." Inside Congress, the reaction was more complicated. Some colleagues congratulated Jasmine quietly in the hallway. Others avoided her altogether. A few whispered that she was too visible now. That she was making it harder for all of them. In the Judiciary Committee, there was talk of introducing new review standards for administrative filings. Behind closed doors, senior aides drafted early outlines of legislation that would mandate triple verification on civil enforcement notices issued from the judiciary to any elected official. None of this had happened 72 hours ago. But not everyone wanted change. In a private conversation inside the Eisenhower Executive Office building, two White House aides debated whether to intervene. One argued, the president should commend both women publicly, for transparency, if nothing else. The other disagreed. "If we elevate this," he said, "we legitimize the idea that the court needs watching. That's a slippery slope." Meanwhile, Jasmine sat with her team in her D.C. office, reading over statements she hadn't written. Her name was everywhere. And it didn't feel like a win. "I didn't ask for this," she said, eyes still on the screen. "I asked a question." They made it a movement. Jeannie nodded slowly. "But you also didn't flinch. That matters." Mason chimed in. "You've got people following this story who've never read a legal brief in their lives. That's not nothing." "Then we better do something with it," Jasmine said, "before it gets turned into another political chew toy." That afternoon, she sat for a live interview on a PBS evening program. No makeup crew. No fancy backdrop. Just a gray wall and a wired mic. The host, Ariana D'Angelo, asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "Did Judge Barrett's letter change how you feel about the situation?" Jasmine didn't answer right away. Then, "It reminded me that humanity and hierarchy don't have to cancel each other out. That power doesn't mean silence when you mess up. I respected it. I still want the system changed. But I respected it." Ariana nodded. "Do you feel vindicated?" Jasmine smiled slightly. "I don't think anyone wins when the highest court and a sitting congresswoman have to exchange apologies in public. This wasn't about victory. It was about visibility." By the time the interview ended, #visibility not victory was trending. High school civics teachers started planning lessons around it. One college in Seattle announced a guest lecture series titled, "When Power Listens." But not everyone was content with lessons and reflections. In the back rooms of Capitol Hill, agendas were shifting. And some were looking to steer the attention away from system flaws and back onto politics. That meant one more move was needed. One that couldn't be tweeted. The request came quietly, no cameras, no press release. Just a short message, relayed through staff. Justice Barrett would like to meet with Congresswoman Crockett. In person. No aides. Just the two of them. Jasmine stared at the email on her screen for a moment before responding. "Set it up," she said. "But neutral ground, somewhere off the record. Off the grid." They met in a small, secure conference room tucked away in the Library of Congress. An unmarked side room used for cross-branch meetings. That rarely made it into the public schedule. Jasmine arrived first, dressed casually in dark slacks and a blazer. No entourage. No binder. She sat at the far end of the table, her expression cool but open. Barrett arrived minutes later, hands clasped in front of her, expression unreadable. She wasn't wearing her robe, just a soft gray coat and simple heels. They exchanged a polite nod. No handshake. Just a pause. And then both sat down. For a few seconds. Neither said a word. Finally, Barrett broke the silence. "I don't know how it happened," she said. "But it did. And I signed it." Jasmine nodded once. "And you owned it. That matters." Barrett's voice was steady. "It wasn't bravery. It was necessary. Sometimes the two are the same thing." Jasmine replied. Another pause. Barrett leaned forward, elbows on the table. "The public doesn't see how thin the margins are. Behind the scenes. How one keystroke can become a headline. But what scared me wasn't the mistake. It was how long it took us to catch it." Jasmine's tone was low. "I wasn't scared for me. I was scared of how easily they expected me to disappear into it. That's what I'm used to. People expecting me to sit with the error quietly. To be the footnote." Barrett looked her in the eyes. "You didn't sit. You stood." "And so did you," Jasmine said. There was a long silence between them. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Like two people who knew what it meant to bear weight in different ways. Barrett finally said, "I'll support whatever review is needed to prevent this from happening again. Whether that costs me politically or not." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "You think this will cost you?" "I think transparency always costs something," Barrett replied. "But silence costs more." Jasmine let that hang in the air. They talked for nearly an hour. No recordings. No notes. Just two public figures discussing responsibility, systems, and the invisible cost of institutional pride. At one point, Jasmine mentioned a school teacher in her district who had shown her post to a civics class. Barrett smiled at that. Not because it was flattering, but because it proved something still worked. Before leaving, Barrett stood and extended her hand. This time, Jasmine took it. Firm grip. No cameras. Just a human moment. When Barrett walked out, reporters waited. But she didn't stop. Jasmine left 10 minutes later. Looking calm, steady, unreadable. That night, both women issued coordinated, minimal statements. Today, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Justice Amy Coney Barrett met privately to discuss recent events and the importance of trust, transparency, and system integrity. No further comments will be made at this time. It wasn't flashy. But it carried weight. The public respected the privacy. For once, there were no leaks. No anonymous sources trying to fill in the blanks. Just a collective pause. An acknowledgement that sometimes progress doesn't need an audience. But behind that silence, shifts were already in motion. Legal scholars began calling for a Crockett Clause. A new review layer for judiciary-enforced penalties. Meanwhile, Barrett's letter was now being studied in ethics classes at 3 universities. A clip from Jasmine's PBS interview played again on national news that evening. Her words echoed. This wasn't about victory. It was about visibility. But even after that private meeting, the story wasn't quite over. Because the questions still lingered. What would actually change now that the cameras had turned away? And who would hold the pen on what came next? The media had moved on. At least, that's what it looked like on the surface. The 24-hour cycle found new controversies to chew through. But under that noise, something had shifted. 2 weeks after the private meeting, Jasmine Crockett stood in a quiet committee room in the Capitol. No reporters. No audience. Just a draft document in her hand. Judicial Accountability and Administrative Clarity Act. A bill that would mandate a 3-tier verification system for civil enforcement orders issued by any federal judge, particularly those that could impact public officials. Or public trust. It wasn't flashy. No one would make campaign ads about it. But it was real. And it was moving forward. She passed the file across the table. To Representative Ellen Knox from Oregon, who had quietly supported the legislation since day one. "This isn't just about me," Jasmine said. "It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to go viral to be heard." Knox nodded. "You've got bipartisan interest. It's technical and smart. That's the kind of bill that survives." Crockett smiled. "Surviving's a good place to start." Meanwhile, in a lecture hall at Ohio State, a professor of constitutional law played two clips for his class, one of Barrett's confirmation hearing, and the other of Jasmine's PBS interview. He pointed between them. "You don't have to agree with either of them," he told his students. "But you do have to respect the moment they shared." Two institutions collided, and instead of choosing ego, they chose correction. Across the country, local newspapers picked up human interest angles. A middle school civics class in Wichita sent handwritten letters to both women. One seventh grader wrote, "I didn't know judges could say sorry. I thought they were like superheroes that never messed up." Amy Barrett read every letter quietly. She never responded publicly, but her clerk confirmed. She kept them in a box in her office. By the end of the month, she'd submitted internal recommendations for procedural changes. Ones that would apply not only to Supreme Court justices, but federal courts across the country. It wasn't something she had to do. But she did it anyway. Not because she wanted credit. Because the silence afterwards still echoed. As for Jasmine, she was back in the rhythm of policy work. Energy grants, labor hearings, housing reforms. But everywhere she went, people asked about that letter, about that moment. Some approached with tears. Others with stories of mistakes that no one ever apologized for. One woman at a town hall in Lubbock stood up, clutching her purse and her voice. "My boss fired me over an error I didn't make," she said. "Nobody believed me, and I didn't have a platform. But when I saw how you stood there, without yelling, without crumbling, I felt like somebody finally got it." Jasmine stepped down from the podium and hugged her. No cameras rolled, but the room remembered. Later, in an interview, she was asked what stuck with her most. She thought for a long time before answering. "People think power is about how loud you can be. But sometimes it's how quiet you can stay. When everyone else expects you to lose control. It's choosing to build something from the mess, instead of setting it on fire." And maybe that was the real aftershock. Not the scandal, or the apology, or the political tension. But the fact that two people, backed into a corner by chaos, chose integrity. The fine had been erased. The code corrected. The apology made. But the impact remained. Not in headlines, but in habits. Barrett went back to her chambers. Jasmine went back to her constituents. And in a nation obsessed with noise, both had made something rare. A moment that made people stop, and think, and remember. So maybe the lesson wasn't just about error. Maybe it was about what we do after the error. Who we become when no one's demanding it. And how sometimes the smallest human decisions can echo louder than any verdict ever could.